Okay, good morning and welcome to Sunday Theology Talks, to the people who are here in person and to all those who are following via the live stream. So we had an interruption of a couple of weeks with guest speakers, and we resume this journey, which I called Mapping Evil, or the Problem of Evil and Suffering with the Help of Literature. And I've, in the meantime, during these past 2 weeks, I've kind of listened to some feedback from people, and a lot of people seem to like the this kind of journey, and other people find it slightly challenging. Challenging because of the material we are reading, challenging because it seems that it's difficult to have so long to wait before going into a more theoretical or theological explanation of the issue of evil and suffering. So now it seems, okay, we are looking into these little side aspects, what looks like side aspects of the problem, but we don't have the whole picture. So before we enter into the topic of today's lecture, so this novel by Jonathan Littell, I thought I would first of all quote to you a few passages from a wonderful letter which has been written by Pope Francis to the whole church on the importance of reading literature, of reading novels, which I think comes exactly at the right moment, as far as I'm concerned. I put a few passages of this letter, and in the handout, which is on the website, you'll find on the website, I added to the text of this conference, I added the text of the letter by Pope Francis, and also the first chapter of the novel we are studying today. But so if you want to read the whole letter, which I warmly recommend you, you have the text. I sent it to you. But look what he says. So number 1 in your handout, he mentions the example of Paul, St. Paul, on the Areopagus, where, Paul tried to speak to the Athenians, philosophers or people who were not Christian, using or quoting their poets. And at one point he mentions the resurrection of Christ, and that's the moment in which they say, oh, listen, we'll listen to you another time. So they dismiss him. And they dismiss him, calling him a spermologos, which can mean babbler, someone who says things which are meaningless in Greek, but also, and that's something which I'd never come across before, I discovered through this letter, but also a gatherer of seeds, spermoia, the seeds in Greek, and logos does not mean only reason or word, but also lego, is the same word as collect, is the same root, so is a gathering. So gathering of seeds, and I really love this. What was surely meant to be an insult, says Pope Francis, proved ironically to be profoundly true. Paul gathered the seeds of pagan poetry, and overcoming his first impressions, acknowledged the Athenians to be extremely religious, and sees in the pages of the classical literature a veritable preparatio evangelica, a preparation for the gospel. So he sees Paul in the works of pagan or non-Christian literature, I would say, we can say secular literature in our case, a preparation for the gospel. And then he says, the definition of literature I like very much is listening to another person's voice. Listening to voices we would not know otherwise. Would not know otherwise. And for instance, the novel I selected for today is an account of the Holocaust through the eyes of an SS officer. So through the eyes of one of the perpetrators, which is something that has scandalized and has really shocked a lot of critics. It's something that generates a narrative which often is unbearable, is really incredibly difficult to sustain. It's not an easy novel to read, but again, we would not have that, and it's not to have the viewpoint of a perpetrator to defend him, absolutely not. But the idea of this novel, The Kindly Ones by Jonathan Littell, is really that if you want to fathom really the depth of the evil which has been perpetrated during the Second World War, you have to see it also, not first of all, also through the eyes of some of the people who were those who killed, mercilessly so many people. So listening to another person's voice. And then one of the other problems, one of the other critics I heard, not criticism, but observations that came back to me was about these novels is that they are difficult. They are really, some of them are hard to read also. If you remember the third, Hania Yaginayara, A Little Life, it basically is the story of trauma and a serious trauma. So going through all the pages of description of how this trauma influences the life of a person was not an easy reading. But here the Pope says that numerous pages of literature correspond to what St. Ignatius calls spiritual desolation. And for him, desolation and consolation from St. Ignatius are two of the faces which are equally indispensable in a balanced process of discernment. The difficulty or tedium that we feel in reading certain texts is not necessarily bad or useless. And there is always a slump when you read a novel, any novel. There's excitement in the beginning, and then the middle, and this is where a lot of people give up. But if you keep going, then you find again the interest. But there are some novels in which this desolation or this desert lasts really particularly through long stretches. So it is clear, Pope Francis adds, that the reader is not simply the recipient of an edifying message, but a person challenged to press forward on a shifting terrain where the boundaries between salvation and perdition are not a priori obvious and distinct. One thing that literature excels at is exposing us to real life. And in real life, the boundaries between salvation and perdition, between good and evil, are really not always obvious and distinct. And if there is one reason to justify, if there was a need to justify, but to encourage us to approach literature also as part of our journey of faith, there is really the fact that it exposes us to real life in ways that are incomparable. Reading as an act of discernment directly involves the reader as both the subject who reads, but also the object of what is being read. In reading a novel as a work of or a work of poetry, the reader actually experiences being read by the words that he or she is reading. Readers can thus be compared to players on a field. They play the game, but the game is also played through them in the sense that they are totally caught up in the action. So you see, it's a transforming experience. And one of the reasons why I'm so fond of using as much as possible literature in teaching is that personally, it is through literature that I really understood or was able to flesh out a lot of the things which I studied in theology. As long as they remain just theological subjects, they are abstracts, they are disconnected from life. The more one exposes oneself, is being read, you see, is being caught up in the action, immersed in lives, listens to voices which I would not know otherwise, the more I do this, the more I can discover more deeply the relevance of a lot of aspects of Christianity. And sometimes, or very often, I can detect more easily what is artificial, or what is shall I say, yes, artificial in a lot of the ways in which Christian doctrine is exposed. Having said that, I just would like, because there's been already, we already saw 3 novels and we're going to the 4th, and faithful to this idea of being gatherers of seeds, I just decided, I thought it would be nice to gather these seeds we have seen over the past few weeks. So the first week we, number 2, we saw The Lord of the Flies by William Golding, and the seed which I personally gathered from this was that the description or the perception of human situation from the viewpoint of someone who is not a Christian, which is that we discover ourselves. I mean, we wake up almost as soon as we become conscious human beings, individuals. We wake up in an existential condition that exposes us to fear and triggers survival mechanisms that lead to the survival of the fittest and the will to power. Okay, so one can agree or disagree with this analysis, but there's a lot to be said about the impact that fear has in a lot of the ways in which we react in our lives. It might be that the survival mechanism is inevitable. We all, when we are afraid, we all tend to become more aggressive, or we tend to become more less likely to listen really to others because we feel threatened, etc., etc. And yet it is also possible that it is not an inevitable outcome, and that there are other ways of dealing with this existential fear. Okay. Represented, as we saw in the first novel, by one of the characters, the character of this little boy called Simon, of whom the author says that he had eyes to see. Okay, he had eyes to see. So he is the symbol of another kind of vision. If you remember, there was the character of Piggy that symbolizes the vision of reason, that is supposed to give the answer to all the problems, but fails. The only one who really understands the situation in which the boys find themselves on this island is only this little boy, this little frail boy, Simon, who had this vision, which points to an artistic, religious, and mystical capacity of vision. And Simon had owed this capacity, this vision, and this capacity for empathy to his frailties, as we saw. Okay? To his capacity to withdraw from others, to be alone, one would say meditate. He had a secret place in the jungle. So, I mean, it's a tiny little point, but it's interesting, again, if one tries to build progressively an image of or an understanding or an insight into the problem of evil and suffering, well, the seed I gather from this novel, there are others, but one of the seeds I gather from this novel is that, yes, we are all exposed to fear. We all tend to fall as a default mode into kind of survival mechanisms that lead us to violence. And yet, at the same time, we also have other ways of reacting to this. And we have a character that visualizes this for us. Then in the other novel, A Little Life by Hania Yanagihara, what really the seed which I powerfully, very, very powerfully impacted me on reading this novel was the ways in which evil hides in the depth of our psyche and body, resists verbalization, explanation, and solution. We saw this is the story of someone whose suffering has been such that nothing really, first of all, struggles himself to become conscious of the extent to which this suffering, this evil has shaped, unfortunately, and conditions his life, but also he cannot verbalize it, he cannot explain it, okay? And we talked about traumatic experience, and we did say that we might not be aware on a personal level of traumatic experience that disrupt our lives and impact our behaviors in ways that are destructive of ourselves and of others. But this is how evil works. It leaves an imprint that is not conscious, resists explanation or verbalization, and generates compulsive behaviors. And then we compared this to the laws of the flies, and we saw that there is a sense in which, just as the character of Yanagihara's novel is not aware of the impact of the evil he has suffered as a child, and this trauma comes out through the form of self-harming, just in the same way, these boys seem happy, seem not to have any problem when they arrive in the island, but very quickly fall into self-destructive behaviors, suicidal and self-harming or self-destructive behaviors. So it gives the impression that there must have been a trauma there somewhere. And then we discover little by little that they come from a world which has been destroyed by war, and they are just reproducing on that island that which is happening in their world at large. And one of the seeds I got from this novel, which is in 9.4 in your handout, is that however problematic the doctrine of original sin, the Christian doctrine of original sin might be, it does gesture towards something similar to what these novels describe, a traumatic experience at some formative point of the history of humanity that conditions our life in the present. The fact that we do not remember it, even historically, there is no, in our history, in the history of humanity, we don't remember, the original sin. There is no historical record of it. That there is no historical record of it, that it is forgotten or repressed, is what it makes it a trauma, gives it power to disrupt us in the present in ways that are, to some degree at least, compulsive. Okay? And the other seed which I gathered from that novel is that we might balk at the idea that there can be, in the lives of some people, a lot of people actually, such a level of suffering that it is too much, that the person really becomes almost impossible to heal, because we think that as Christians we have to keep this kind of positive spin that, every kind of evil can be healed, every kind of situation in the right conditions could be solved. Well, the reality is that if we think really about our own faith and Christianity, we are exposed to exactly the kind of suffering, the same kind of suffering. In number 11 on your handout, Christian faith is pervaded by a potent hope for healing. See Jesus' miracles for sure, and yet is not afraid of facing a suffering that, as with the cross, annihilates lives. Christ is completely annihilated. He is exposed to a suffering that destroys him, entirely destroys him. It destroys him physically, emotionally, and even religiously. This is something that should help us not to be afraid to look in the face suffering even when it is intolerable, not because we have the answer to it, but because we know that we believe in a God who is not afraid of it, who has kind of more than explored, has embraced the depth of this suffering beyond what anyone could have thought or hoped for. So this is another little seed which I keep for myself. And another seed from the grapes of wrath, which we saw 3 weeks ago on a last kind of talk before our guest speakers, is the fact that, so if you remember, this novel reconfigures the meaning of sin from personal to systemic sins, and shows that, the real evil very often is the evil that strikes us without us being able to point to anyone, any singular cause. In the modern, so I'm number 13, industrial age, sin has reached new depths when it becomes something perpetrated by huge companies or organisms or countries. These institutions are faceless, they are relentless, and they have the ability to cause damage to millions of people and to a planet in a massive scale. This evil sidesteps all accountability because it is not a person, it is a system, okay? It is said to have originated somewhere else, not with a messenger, not with a bank, and beyond that with a company, and beyond that the corporation somewhere back in the East. So that you can't really react to anyone or point to anyone. You just see the consequences, or you suffer the consequences of this evil. But the other seed which I got from this novel and really struck me, and this, the reading I did for this talk, even if I'd read it in the past, is that Steinbeck is not a Christian. Steinbeck is someone who believes that religion is part of the problem, is part of this systemic evil that makes, kind of destroys the lives of people. And yet at the same time, his characters, his answer to the problem of evil, and the models he kind of portrays, and especially Jim Casey, if you remember JC, the same initials as Christ, is molded on the figure of Christ. So paradoxically, what he's saying is that he doesn't believe that Christianity as a religion is the answer, and yet he thinks that the only, as far as he can see on what is available in humanity, if we didn't have a figure like Jesus Christ, we'd have to invent it. We need someone who tackles evil the way he does. And his characters really embody this approach. So again, you see, now my hope is that we are going to go through a few more novels before getting into the kind of a more organic approach and explanation, more theological one, on the question of evil. But I really hope that these little seeds, once we put all of them together, they give us a much more realistic and much more close to life sense of what are we talking about when we deal with evil, when we deal with suffering. So a few words, and I won't stay too long on this as well, but on the novel today, so Jonathan Littell, The Kindly Ones. This is a novel, so I attached to the handout you received the first chapter of this novel, and the novel is massive. Incidentally, that's the other thing I wanted to tell you, is someone told me, the pace of the lectures means that we can't read all these novels. You don't read to read all these novels, but I hope that the information I give you about them might help you to decide, I want to read this one, or I want to read this one. Even if you read just one of them. I mean, for me, I'm always looking for on the lookout for advice about, novels or books to read. I'm very picky when it comes to reading a novel, because, if I have to spend, 3 weeks on something, I want to make sure that I don't waste my time. And I hope that you realize that, with these novels, you won't waste your time. So this one is a massive one, but if you read only just the introduction is enough, because if you won't read the whole novel, and these the text which I attached to the handout, which is on the website. And it is a very, even if it is massively long, contains a huge amount of facts. It's based on a 10-year research, historical, of the most kind of meticulous research on World War II and the Holocaust in particular, so the extermination camps and the German, and the German ways of killing people, etc. It's immensely readable. You are just, caught into it. And it's immensely horrifying at the same time. And this novel, like Hannah Gioia, is one of those in which, as Pope Francis, you are being read, because the strategies used by the author of this book, by Jonathan Littell, are all devised to challenge the domestication of the rhetoric surrounding the Holocaust. The problem is that we grew up with this rhetoric about the Holocaust. We heard about this, since we're children. We've been exposed to all these numbers, millions of people. We have seen all the images. And whether we like it or not, whether it's not intentional, we become like almost, it becomes something, okay, it's part of what it has been. We think we know what it is, but we don't. We think we know the horror it really unleashed or represented, the impact it had in the lives of people, but we don't. And so we need to be disturbed. If we are not disturbed by something, it means that we're not, but something which is evil, it means that we have not faced it really. So this is why some of you told me, this novel is disturbing, this passage is disturbing. Well, that's what it's meant to do. If we want to look into the reality of something that, it's evil, we need to be at least a bit unsettled. And so this novel does this through this fictional autobiography. So all the historical facts are real, but the character and the autobiography is fictional in this character of this former member of the SS that goes through all the major scenes of the Second World War, meets all the main characters, Himmler, Eichmann, Hitler himself, and survives to all this and is there to tell the tale at the end. From that introduction, I've selected few quotes. I won't be able to go through all of them, but I want to go number 22, about how it is to be the perpetrator of these crimes. So he says, just as according to Marx, the worker is alienated from the product of his labor, in genocide or total war in its modern form, the perpetrator is alienated from the product of his actions. Okay? Because the greater question, as you know, has always been, how has it been possible? How can people who, like you and me, have cooperated, participated to, some of the people, okay, you can say they were exceptionally evil, but what about, all the people who worked, who participated in this extermination? How is it possible? What was going on in their minds? So this holds true. So so he says the perpetrator is alienated from the product of his actions. This holds true even for the man who places a gun to the head of another man. You can come over here if you want to. Oh, okay. on the head of another man and pulls the trigger. For the victim was led there by other men. His death was decided on by yet others. And the shooter knows that he is only the last link in a very long chain, and that he doesn't have to ask himself any more questions that does a member of a firing squad who in civilian life executes a man duly sentenced under the law. The shooter knows that it's a chance that has appointed him to shoot, his comrade to guard the cordon, and a third man to drive the truck. At most, he could try to change places with the guard or the driver. So everyone is assigned a place in the system. Nobody individually could perpetrate this crime. Everyone could say, oh, I happen to be at that place and I happen to have to obey to that order, but I'm not responsible for the whole scale, for the whole killing of all these millions of people. And this is even more striking when you think about what happened, what prepared the final solution, so the killing in concentration camps, which was the killing, or the euthanasia, as they call it, of people with mental and physical disabilities in hospitals, so-called hospitals or clinics, before, at the beginning, in the first years of the last years of the 30s, in which you have, I'm reading a bit further down in the same passage, the patients selected within the framework of a legal process. So some people legally were sent to these hospitals and then were welcomed in a building by professional nurses who registered them and undressed them, doctors who examined them and led them into a sealed room, a worker who administered the gas, others cleaned up, and a policeman wrote up the death certificate. Questioned after the war, each one of these people said, "What, me guilty? The nurse didn't kill anyone. She only undressed and calmed the patients, ordinary tasks in her profession. The doctor didn't kill anyone either. He merely confirmed a diagnosis according to criteria established by higher authorities. The worker who opened the gas spigot, the man closest to the actual act of murder in both time and space, was fulfilling a technical function under the supervision of his superiors and doctors. The workers who cleaned out the room were performing a necessary sanitary job, and a highly repugnant one at that. The policeman was following his procedure, which is to record each death and certify that it has taken place without any violation of the laws in force." So who is guilty? Everyone or no one? Okay, it opens really, and this is this SS speaking. So this is a quotation from his autobiography. So he says at one point in 23, once again, let us be clear. I'm not trying to say, so is this character, who speaks, I'm not guilty of this or that. I am guilty. You are not. Fine. But you should be able to admit to yourself that you might also have done what I did. With less zeal, perhaps, but perhaps also with less despair, in any case, one way or another. I think I am allowed to conclude, as a fact established by modern history, that everyone, or nearly everyone, in a given set of circumstances, does what is told to do. And pardon me, but there's not much chance that you are the exception any more than I was. A bit further down he says, you might be luckier than I am, but you are not a better person, because if you have the arrogance to think you are, that's just where the danger begins. And he concludes at the end of this quotation, I live, I do what can be done, it's the same for everyone. I am a man like other men. I am a man like you. I tell you, I am just like you. So that's the thing. I mean, one of the strategies of defense of the people who cooperated to the Holocaust was precisely that, to say that, I simply obeyed the orders. I obeyed the orders which, I didn't kill anyone. And most of these people were people who would not have killed anyone. So let's say for to advance their own career, for instance. They would not have killed someone for these things. Or these are people also who reacted very vehemently when they were accused of having stolen things from the Jewish people they killed. Some of them did, but some of them, they felt, no, I mean, I am an honest person, I would never steal. There was the necessity to kill this person because it was part of what we were told to do, or the final solution, but I am a moral person, I would never steal from someone I have to kill because of necessity. You see, so this is one of the lines of defense they used. They thought of themselves often as the victims, so that they would say, they would like flip the issue and say, look how unlucky I am that I should be the material executor of this plan. I should find myself in that point and have to endure all this horror. As you know, some of the people who did the massive killings on the rear guards of the advance of the German troops in Russia started to have serious psychological problems, because they were there to kill hundreds and hundreds of civilians, women, children at a gunpoint, and this started to mess up with their mind. And you have a lot of records or references to this as how they were the victim. They were the poor people who had to endure this psychological kind of distress because they had to perform that duty. So this was another of the ways in which they kind of protected themselves from a realization of the horror they were participating in. And the other strategy was prevent themselves from thinking by letting themselves or their reactions or their way of thinking be entirely shaped by slogans and by cliches, which, incidentally, is something that happened then, but happens now in the sense that, unfortunately, this is the power of slogans, the powers of cliches, is that people can hang on to those and blindly let themselves to be driven by those, and in this way prevent themselves from actually and in fact thinking. And the major analyst of this paradox, if you want, has been Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt is this, number 28 in the handout. She is this Jewish American American-German, historian and philosopher, and one of the most influential political theorists of the 20th century. And she's written two books, one, The Origin of Totalitarianism, and the other one is Eichmann in Jerusalem. In the first one, she theorizes that the idea of radical evil, kind of an approach to evil that tends to give to present evil as something that really is all-encompassing, etc., etc. But then what happens to her is that she is sent by as a journalist to witness the trial of Eichmann, this German officer who had been, kidnapped in, I think, Argentina, Venezuela, I can't remember, in South America, had been brought in the 60s to Israel, and there was this very public trial. There is a very, very interesting Netflix documentary on this, which is slightly sentimentalized, but I think still is incredibly, incredibly powerful. And to prepare these lectures, I read this book by Hannah Arendt. I'd never read it before, Eichmann in Jerusalem, and it's really again, something that has really struck me. And the paradox and a thing for which she was heavily criticized after the publication of this book, is that she concludes that this man, Eichmann, rather she can't wrap her mind around the fact of how banal, how ordinary, how plain, how cliche this man is. He's not a genius of evil. He's not a diabolical figure. This man who's, had been instrumental to the death of millions of people is not a monster. He's not a monster. And she coins this expression, which is the banality of evil, which has become famous ever since. And if you go to 29.2 in your handout, in Eichmann in Jerusalem and in the bitter controversies about it that followed, she, Hannah Arendt, insisted that only good had any depth. Good can be radical, evil can never be radical. So you see, she kind of somehow kind of denies a previous approach to evil as radical. She says evil can never be radical. It can only be extreme, for it possesses neither depth nor any demonic dimension, yet, and this is its horror, it can spread like a fungus over the surface of the earth and lay waste to the entire world. Evil comes from a failure to think. It defies thought, for as soon as thought tries to engage itself with evil and examine the premises and principles from which it originates, it is frustrated because it finds nothing there. That is the banality of evil. And she comes to this conclusion by listening to us. I went to listen, through this documentary, to these testimonies, and indeed I found exactly the same thing. The longer one listened to him, to this man, one almost feels sorry for this man. I mean, I really, watching the recording of the process, I almost felt sorry for this man. It's just quite strange. The longer one listened to him, the more obvious it became that his inability to speak was closely connected with an inability to think, namely to think from the standpoint of somebody else. No communication was possible with him, not because he lied, but because he was surrounded by the most reliable of all safeguards against the words and the presence of others, and hence against reality as such. When I speak of the banality of evil, I do so only on the strictly factual level, pointing to a phenomenon which stared one in the face at the trial. Except for an extraordinary diligence in looking out for his personal advancement, he had no motives at all. And this diligence in itself was in no way criminal. He certainly would never have murdered his superior in order to inherit his post. He was not stupid. It was sheer thoughtlessness, something by no means identical with stupidity, that predisposed him to become one of the greatest criminals of that period. And if this is banal and even funny, if with the best will in the world one cannot extract any diabolical or demonic profundity from Eichmann, that is still far from calling it commonplace. That such remoteness from reality and such thoughtlessness can wreak more havoc than all the evil instincts taken together, which perhaps are inherent in man, that was in fact the lesson one could learn in Jerusalem. But it was a lesson, neither an explanation of the phenomenon nor a theory about that. So what the seed, if you want, for me, which I got from reading this novel, and I hope you'll have a sense of it if you have time to read the introduction, the text which I gave to you, is how ordinary can evil, or the people who perpetrate evil can be, and how pervasive the mechanisms and how kind of tempting the mechanisms that lead people to be the accomplices of these crimes are. And mind you, for me, today, liberal economy, for instance, especially, let's say the shareholding system, obviously is nothing compared to the systemic evil described in these novels. And yet at the same time, it's also based on the refusal to know what's happening with our money. As long as the money, the money we invest, as long as the money we invest brings yields to us, we don't know what the stock, the people we invest, do with it. Now, there are ethical ways in which this can be done, but the same principle of not wanting to think about, not wanting to know, as long as I can give myself, I can be comfortable in my own skin and give myself the impression that everything is fine, is on a smaller scale, is that which actually explains why evil is possible at a much bigger scale. It's the same mechanism. It's the same mechanism. Only, it's smaller in this case, or it's bigger in that one. And these are aspects of the issue of evil that we might know about, but these novels help us to see with a kind of emphasis and with a kind of reality that I think, at least to me personally, help me to see how serious they are in a different way. Well, thank you. So we'll carry on this reflection in the next in the future. And one of the things I'd like to do, I know that this is generating also a number of questions, especially also for the people who are online. Later on, I want to have sessions in midweek of Q&A, of discussion. So we will have the possibility of kind of exploring this and talking. Unfortunately, the time we have before Mass is always a bit too short. Let us say a little prayer. Lord of all consolation and comfort, be with us and help us to be always with our eyes open and our hearts ready to follow the opportunities for good you offer us in our daily life. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.